Welcome on my first step ever. If you love traveling and if you haven't traveled enough, and if you feel, am I really missing out something in life? Well, there are a lot of things that you can still do with wherever you are. But there are amazing, some really interesting insights that people derive from the different places they migrate to, or maybe the way they think about things. They challenge the status quo, as we all say. So, if you're really interested to know a lot about how or what is the right way of living or what is your way of living, then welcome on this episode where we're going to discuss something really interesting, very relevant, and something that everyone talks about, Ikigai. Now, if you haven't heard about that, we will be uncovering and discovering a lot about that, but knowing a bit more about the person who is going to bring a very different perspective from his angle. So please join me in welcoming Nicholas Kemp. Nick. Hi, Nick.
Hey, Ishani. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. And yeah, it's always a joy to connect with people overseas. So we're extremely fortunate to have technology now that allows us to do that. So actually sort of connecting with people is a source of Ikigai for me. So I really feel very grateful to be on your podcast.
The pleasure is absolutely mine. And it is always for me, it's very intriguing to meet people who have different perspective about the same thing, which people are maybe looking at the same way, because we never think about things differently. And that's why it's very important to delve into stories of people who have done things differently. So before we move into this conversation and I ask you some amazing questions that I would love to, I'd like to introduce you to my audience, my listeners today. Nicholas Kemp is a father, husband, Japanologist. I'm going to ask you about this. It's a very new term for me. Researcher, solopreneur, and author of Ikigai-KAN. Wow, it's very different. It just means feel a life worth living. And I'm sure most of us, actually all of us would love to have that feeling. So that's why Nick is over here and we're going to delve deep into some questions with him. He is also the founder and head coach of Ikigai Tribe, a small community of educators, psychologists, coaches, and trainers who serve their personal communities using the Ikigai concept. Well, now I have said this word way too many times today, just in a minute or so. So we're going to jump right into this. I'm going to ask Nick all about, Nick, I know that you migrated to Japan long back and you spent a really good time over there. So what motivated you to shift to Japan and how different was it from your own country?
Yes. So actually the first time I went to Japan when I was 5, and that's in 1977, believe it or not. So I have some memory of that trip. I remember a babysitter looking after me and my brother, and she was folding us origami. So I had these fond memories. And then in 1995, I was studying hospitality. And at that time, there were a lot of Japanese tourists coming to Australia. When I was studying hospitality at my college, there was this opportunity to go to Japan. And I was really excited by that idea. And I thought, oh, yeah, I'd love to go to Japan. And so I was very fortunate to be awarded the scholarship, the traineeship. And that was for 1 year.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it basically meant I was going to work in a restaurant for a year. And this company were planning to open a chain of restaurants in Melbourne.
Oh, wow.
So it was a big opportunity. I remember just being so excited about wanting to go, and I did everything possible to make sure I could go. So I was so happy when I was awarded the traineeship. And then, I went to Tokyo.
Good on you.
And it was, I was just so excited. I really thought, I really didn't think anything other than that. I was so excited. So when I got there, it was amazing. It was sort of overwhelming in this very positive way. Everything, the beautiful thing about Japan is everything's different, but then the challenging thing about Japan is everything's different. So if you can adapt to change and embrace change and you're really interested, you'll have a great time. So I had a really good time. Sometimes I got homesick, but Yeah, everything Japanese do is different. The way they communicate, the way they eat, obviously the way they talk, the way they engage. So you do have an opportunity to obviously learn a lot when you go to a country that's very, very different to your own culture.
Right. So, Nick, that sounds like a big leap that you took. I think you were, as you mentioned, you had gone there for your traineeship. You were in your college time, and you were, I would say, an adult to be able to take your own decisions and go forward with whatever decision that you take. But that's also the time when most of us are surrounded by all kinds of thoughts, voices. What am I doing in my life? Am I making the right decision? Have I achieved enough, whatever I
Mm.
started off with? So when you did take that step, when you went to Japan, and as you mentioned that it was, the good part was it was different, and that was a challenging part. So I'm really interested to know, and if you could just take us through, like, in top three challenges that you felt in the first year that you were there, because there are a lot of listeners who are here with us. They are youngsters, or they are in that phase, that because everything is so global, people are migrating to different countries and making their own life somehow. So if you would like to share your top three challenges when you first went there in the first year, if you remember some, and how did you overcome that, I think that would be very interesting for our listeners.
Sure. I think the first challenge was understanding and accepting that things can be done differently or are done differently. Just because you've done something your whole life a certain way doesn't make that the best way. So I was a little bit younger then, and so maybe at sometimes I wasn't fully receptive to different ways of doing things, and I think, oh, that's an odd way of doing that, or that's strange. But I think with age you begin to learn, oh, okay, there are different ways of doing things, and you can be receptive and open to those. Obviously, learning Japanese was a real challenge. The way Japanese speak, there's a perception that they're very polite and very formal, and they are in certain contexts. But there's also this very casual way of speaking Japanese. And when you learn a language, generally you learn a very textbook, old school way of learning. I mean, I did back, obviously, in the 90s. Now we have things like YouTube, and people are really lucky they can learn a language pretty much how it's spoken. And then I think learning to deal with homesickness at times. At times it was a bit isolating. It was hard to make friendships, I think, because it was only going to be 1 year, and I was working 6 days a week, basically from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. So we only had 1 day off, and the opportunity to make friends wasn't really there. So I certainly made friends with my co-workers. That was hard. And I remember some nights or some days finishing work and just thinking, oh, I'm so tired, and I've got to come back to work tomorrow. Yeah. And I was really thinking, oh, I need to take a holiday, or I need to make some friends. Yeah.
So what kept you going despite these three top challenges, which I can totally resonate with, because even I have migrated to a new country and I can feel everything that you're saying right now. So what kept you going despite all these challenges?
I certainly felt a sense of gratitude and obligation to my employer. So they trusted me. They gave me this opportunity. So I felt, obviously, I've got to just keep going. I did have a strong interest in learning. So I found ways to hack learning. I would I'd basically buy picture books for children and start learning to read Japanese while I was cooking. So
multitasking.
I'd sort of be cooking, and then when there was a break, I'd pull out the book and sort of be reading this children's book on, Japanese history or animal names. And then I did actually have friends who I had met in Melbourne before going to Japan. And so I had a handful of good friends. And once they had come back to Japan, I was able to reconnect with them and see them and, call them. And then even, this will sound so strange, but I used to handwrite letters to family and friends. And that was a way to feel connected, and kind of I could share these positive things and sort of remind myself, overall this experience is good. So that's, yeah, that's
Lovely.
something amazing, isn't it? I'd sort of never do that now. Imagine writing a letter now.
I actually, it's, I don't find it funny. In fact, I find it really heart touching and heartwarming, I would say, because this is something that we don't do these days. So, I mean, the value of that particular activity is, I associate the value even more now, because there are not many people who would do this for you, and if they do, it really means something.
Yeah.
And there's something very interesting that you mentioned, that what kept you going, and my takeaway is that you said you were grateful. Besides the obligation that you had, you also had that feeling of being grateful, because unless you are thankful about something, grateful about something, and it becomes really challenging, it becomes like a burden to keep moving forward. So you were focused, and you did find ways out to make things interesting for you, which is amazing. And I'm sure our listeners, the audience over here, if they are in the same situation, they know that they need to innovate. If things start stagnating, that's where you come in, your creativity comes in, my friend, that you have to innovate. Now, moving from here, I wanted to understand, you come from a profession which is, I believe, it's one of the most profession where people really do hard work. Being in hospitality, it's no easy job. Physically, mentally, it's very straining from both ends. So from this particular job, how did you transition into a philosopher, a psychologist, an educator? How did you take that journey, if you can take us through that?
Sure. It was a long journey, but I remember after finishing the traineeship and going back to Melbourne, there was a delay with the company opening restaurants. And after 2 years, it really didn't seem like they were going to open restaurants. And I really had no idea what was going on. And I actually wanted to go back to Japan. I went back to teach English. And that was kind of strange, because I wasn't very academic and I struggled with English, but I was very good at communicating and being patient and caring. And when you go to Japan, you're actually teaching conversational English for the most part. And I worked at this commercial school, which was called an Eikaiwa school, which means an English conversation school. And you're basically guiding people on how to have conversations. And so that was interesting to do that as a job, and then to be in Japan and having fun and reconnecting with friends, and again studying Japanese. And then I just had this desire to always, some stage, I just wanted to do my own thing. And I knew from pretty much my mid to late 20s that I just had this desire to do my own thing. And eventually I started my own school. Some years later, I moved to the town where my wife is from, much smaller than Tokyo, and I started my own school there. It's funny, you sort of make these decisions, but also sometimes they're not the best decision. You realize, oh wow, I've created a school. I can't grow it large enough to employ anyone, and I can't leave it because I can't take holidays, because I've got to be looking after my students. And so you learn when you start making these decisions, and you tend to see things with very positive, ambitious eyes. But then when you start doing the actual work, you realize, okay, there's a few challenges. But that's probably a part of growth. And then it led to me learning about the internet. And then I learned about marketing. I made my first language product with my business partner in Japan. And then we had a son. And then by the time he was about 3, we felt coming back to Australia would sort of be best for him, because Australia's a multicultural and a few other reasons.
Yeah.
And I actually did go back to a job when I returned to Melbourne. Mm-hmm. And it was the worst experience of my life.
Oh.
So it was just...
sorry to hear that.
Yeah, it was meaningless work. There was workplace bullying, and it really got me quite depressed. And I just thought, this can't go on. I can't continue to live like this. So I thought I would rather do my own thing and fail than continue to live like this. So I literally one day, I just got a manager, I got a witness, and said, all this bullying's been happening. and I'm leaving now. And I just walked out. And yeah, that was really hard, but it felt so freeing. I can't tell you how freeing it felt to walk out the doors and just think, I'll never have to put up with this, bullying and crap again. So that was, that sort of defining moment, because it really then led to me pursuing all these different things. And I tried all these various online businesses. And then eventually, sort of 10 years into doing that, I stumbled upon Ikigai. And there is a backstory, because I was introduced to the word Ikigai way back in 1998. So on my first day of teaching, I was, young and ambitious and sort of showing off my Japanese to these Japanese coworkers on a lunch break. We were walking to this cafe or a restaurant, and this Japanese girl just casually said, "Oh, what's your Ikigai?" in Japanese.
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Ikigai? What's that?" And I didn't know what she meant. And she gave me this explanation. It kind of blew my mind. And I was like, wow, you have one word that encapsulates purpose and the reason why we get up in the morning and the reason why we battle on through life. And I felt, gee, that's just amazing. And I remember going into work the next day, wanting to talk to this coworker about this word and being disappointed to find out that she'd been transferred. And I think I was thinking all morning about, I've got to talk to this girl about this word Ikigai. And then, life got in the way, and just I moved on with working. But then 10 years later, I started seeing the Venn diagram and all these romantic notions that Ikigai is a word from Okinawa, and it's the secret to longevity. And I just knew factually all of that was either wrong or exaggerated. And then it kind of blew up. And then I started seeing Ikigai everywhere, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on blog posts, in TED Talks. Everyone sharing the Venn diagram, which I'm sure you've seen and probably your audience knows about, that Venn diagram that asks, are you doing something that you love, that you're good at, that the world needs, and that you can be paid for?
Thank you so much for taking us through that, because I'm sure some of them know, some of them don't know. And stay tuned right now, because this is the place where Nick is going to take us through that. What is this different perspective on Ikigai? And I suppose by now you've understood what Ikigai is. As Kemp said, it's the purpose of living. What is that helps you wake up every day? Now, the conversation that Nick had with the Japanese girl, we wouldn't know, but we will know what Nick has discovered and what's that different take that he can tell us now. So, Nick, the floor is all yours.
Sure. I guess the way I can answer this now is I've spent the last 2.5 years interviewing Japanese researchers, Japanese authors, non-Japanese who've studied the concept. And it's really interesting for two sort of main reasons. For Japanese, Ikigai is very simple. It's something very small and personal. And it might be their pet. It might be something like camping. It might be, for grandparents, it's usually their grandchildren. So it's not something grandiose and flamboyant and ambitious. So for your average Japanese, it's something quite small. And maybe in Japanese culture, we could understand it as a coping mechanism, because Japanese do live stressful lives. They tend to work longer and harder, and they probably appreciate these smaller things that help them, get through the day. So that's one way to look at it. Now, there's a growing body of research on the Ikigai concept that started in the 60s and has continued on. And there was a pioneering researcher called Miyako Kamiya who wrote the seminal book called Ikigai ni Tsuite. And tsuite means about or regarding. So it might be regarding Ikigai or about Ikigai. And this book is still referenced today. It's considered standard. And even researchers refer to it now. And she discovered that there were 7 Ikigai needs we needed to satisfy in order to feel Ikigai-kan. So Ikigai-kan means Ikigai feeling, or Ikigai awareness or Ikigai perception. So the key difference is Ikigai is something you feel. You have an experience and then you feel it. And so she said we have Ikigai sources. So again, relationships, people, hobbies, aspects of our work, even memories. So we have these sources, and then related to these sources, we have feelings. So it really is something you feel. It's not something you achieve or earn. It's certainly not relatable or influenced by money. So yeah, that's sort of the big difference. It's something you feel, and we are human beings who feel. So we want to feel that life is worth living. Yeah.
Yes. So the difference that we are looking at over here is that when the Venn diagram started kind of circulating everywhere, the Venn diagram propagated the thinking that what you love and what you want to do, and if that can earn you money, is exactly the thing that will keep you happy and you should keep going. Whereas if I've understood this correctly, the basic essence is that Ikigai is something that you love and you feel for it, that you feel that you have done something good. That's the way that you feel about Ikigai. I hope I've got this correct.
Sort of. It is definitely something you feel, and for the most part, it could be something you love. But as we all know, in life, if we overcome a challenge, or if we grow, or if we face fears and break through them, we gain some deeper understanding of who we are. So yes. Ikigai is very much about your sense of self. And a very good way to understand it is, are you living your values? Or even, do you even know what your values are? Because your Ikigai is aligned to your values. And so I always say, if you're living in harmony with your values, or you're expressing your values, you will feel Ikigai. But if you're forced to compromise your values because of your work or a relationship, obviously you're not going to feel Ikigai. Now, Cami Amiko, she said there were basically 7 needs we needed to satisfy in order to feel Ikigai. And they are life satisfaction, change and growth, having a bright future, resonance, which really means social affiliation, so having meaningful relationships, freedom or having a sense of freedom, self-actualization, meaning and growth. And then to add to that, she spoke of the importance of having a sense of purpose. And maybe back in the 60s, where people probably couldn't really explore purpose that much because they were more like a cog in the wheel of these big companies. I think today this sense of purpose has become crucial for us. And she did write that you feel Ikigai most intensely when you have a sense of purpose and you're pursuing something you feel that only you can do.
Wow.
But that thing you're pursuing doesn't have to be something big. It can be something quite humble. And so, yeah, I really think there are 8 Ikigai needs. And, you know, a lot of people might relate them to something like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like the top part of his pyramid, or there's the PERMA model that's often used in coaching. So it's very relatable to positive psychology or intrinsic motivation. And, yeah, it goes back to feeling Ikigai. And sometimes it won't be something you love, because it might be this challenge you have to endure. But once you get through it, you realize, wow, I'm capable of something more. Like I didn't realize I had this in me. So it's very much tied to, your identity and almost like the growth mindset and self-actualizing, where you're not trying to be the best version of yourself. You're just trying to express your unique imagination through creativity. That's how Camia described self-actualization, where you express your uniqueness through your creativity, whether that is something creative like art, or whether it's in business, or whether it's in cooking or parenting. So she was she was a doctor, a researcher, she became a professor, she had the most incredible resume. She tutored the Princess Michiko, the former Empress of Japan. She was a linguist, a translator.
Right.
And even though she was incredibly successful, for her, writing was her ikigai. And she didn't pursue that until her mid-40s.
Wow.
And yeah, she was successful. She had children, probably, everything.
Yes.
I mean, way back then in the 60s, most Japanese women weren't doing anything like that. But she wasn't satisfied. For her, writing was important, and she wanted to express herself through writing. Yeah. So that gives you a bit of history on this research pioneer, Kamiya Miyako, and what it means from a research level.
So, Nick, thank you so much for taking us through what Ikigai really means in a lot of depth, but also like in very crisp, clear language. And it's very interesting to know that it is the smallest of the things that make you feel happy or that make you express your unique self is where the Ikigai lies. So I think this is very interesting. And I am so glad that I had this conversation. Everyone who's listening to us, watching us, we had this conversation with you, and we are honored that you could share this platform. And more than anything, Nick, I really like to thank you for being so honest and authentic and real about your journey, because you just did not share the moment where you realized your ikigai and that how you're living your life, but you've also shared with us the failures, the mistakes that you once did, how you felt, and how did you overcome, what actions you took. Because that is very important, and it's not easy to open ourselves, the dark spaces of ourselves with so many people. But I really want to tell you, it will help a lot of people who are listening to us, because when we hear someone sharing their pain, we feel that, okay, we can share it with someone else, and it becomes easier. So thank you so much for being on my first step ever. And just so that I can wrap up the question that I had asked over there. So from this amazing journey, I think that's when you found your ikigai, and exactly when that you started being a researcher, a psychologist, a philosopher. So right now, in your space where you have found your ikigai, what are the top 3 things that you are grateful about every day?
Good question. I think I'm very grateful for being born, in Australia, and at this time. Most people are born into poverty or hardship. So I'm extremely lucky to be educated, to be from a safe, wealthy country, and to be able to find these opportunities. And that's something I try to remind myself of. Like, if I'm having a bad day, really, I'm having a bad day because I'm, frustrated about something about work, or I'm just not feeling, excited or something. So yeah, being grateful for where I'm born and where I've grown up in the education. I think all the people all these people who've helped me. So I've had so many professors and researchers and authors freely given me their time. They've come onto my podcast. Wow. And some have allowed me to publish their work in my book. So that's amazing. And then I think I'm grateful, I guess, for, family and friends, everything they've done for me. There's so much our parents probably have done for us that we will never know about. We just won't know what they've done for us. Same with friends. And, a friend came up to have lunch with me yesterday, and he treated me to lunch, and I was a bit stressed, and I sort of realized, wow, I'm lucky. So I made sure to, text him and say, thanks, mate, for coming up. So we're really lucky with the friends or family we have. We just got to stop and, as you say, take time to appreciate it. Yeah. So I'm grateful to you too.
So am I. And I am so happy that this particular session, the chat with you, has been so amazing. From your story of a young boy moving to a different country, going through different challenges, coming across a particular term, not knowing what exactly it was, and then chancing upon different challenges and difficulties, but making their own mistake, knowing what actions that need to be taken, and then really finding the ikigai, and now taking this platform, all the platform that's available for you, to share that with people so that they understand ikigai as early on as possible in their life. So you are already doing a lot for a lot of people, my friend. Thank you so much, Nick, for being on My First Step Ever. And before we take your leave, I always ask my guest speakers to leave our listeners with a thought or a saying that they really resonate with.
Call or reconnect with an old friend. So if there's a friend and you've been thinking, oh, I should call so-and-so, call them and just check in with them and say, I was thinking of you and we should catch up. Reconnect with someone and you'll feel so good and you will feel ikigai after that. So that's one way to feel ikigai, because we can have many ikigai. It's not just one thing, it can be many things. So reconnect with someone you care about and just let them know you love them in some way. You don't have to say I love you. Just say I was thinking of you and how you're going, or take them out to lunch. Yeah.
I think that really takes out of pressure from a lot of people's mind, that you really don't need to say I love you to express I love you. You can do that in different ways.
Different ways, yeah. So,
thank you so much, Nick, for being on My First Step Ever. It's incredible. And I know for a lot of people who are listening to us, watching us, you might be very interested in what Nick is doing. So do check out his work. I will leave his link whenever I'm going to release this episode. And I'm really interested to follow his work. I have followed a few things that I really liked, and it was an amazing session to talk to him. So my friends, I'll see you soon next episode.